Good morning. Our top stories today. We are taking a look at the latest in that Indonesia plane crash mystery, the new developments in that investigation. We're also taking a look at President Trump, a new initiative proposed by the president, as well as how he's hitting the campaign trail, and our exclusive interview with Jonathan Karl and the president. And lastly, an about-face by the University of Maryland, why a coach was fired just a day after being reinstated. But first, here are your top headlines.
A new lawsuit alleges disgraced movie producer Harvey Weinstein sexually assaulted a 16-year-old Polish model and aspiring actress in 2002. Weinstein's lawyers call the allegations that he harassed and emotionally abused the unnamed woman for nearly a decade preposterous.
More than 1,500 Google workers plan to walk out in protest, upset with the way the company has dealt with executives accused of sexual misconduct.
South Korea's president now says North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will visit his country soon. There's no timeline for the visit, but it will be the first ever by a North Korean leader to Seoul.
GM now says it's going to offer buyouts to 18,000 white-collar workers in North America.
Online shopping predictions are out today. Adobe says it expects U.S. shoppers to spend about $124 billion online, up nearly 15% from last year. And Amazon's new company-wide $15 minimum wage goes into effect today.
Welcome to the Debrief. We begin with that exclusive interview with President Trump. Just 5 days to go until those midterm elections. The president is surprising even the Pentagon, calling for more troops to go to the Mexican border. Our own Jonathan Karl sat down with the president. Here are some of the things he had to say.
Okay, you're talking about 10,000, maybe 15,000 active duty U.S. military to the border, more than we have fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan, more than we have fighting ISIS in Syria.
Right.
You're really going to do that?
It's very important. We have to have a wall of people, very highly trained people, terrific, dedicated patriots. That's what they are. You have caravans coming up that look a lot larger than it's reported, actually. I mean, I'm pretty good at estimating crowd size, and I will tell you, they look a lot bigger than people would think.
Well, what we see is deeply impoverished people fleeing violence, many of them women and children. You're going to send 15,000 active duty U.S. military?
Mostly men, and it's actually mostly young men, and a lot of rough people, John. They're pushing the women right up into the front, not good, and they're pushing the few kids right up to the front.
But they're 900 miles away. The active duty military, you know the law. I mean, you're the president. Yep. They can't arrest people crossing the border. It
depends. National emergency covers a lot of territory. They can't invade our country. You look at that, it almost looks like an invasion. It really does look like an invasion.
Those caravans are an invasion?
Oh, I think so. I think when you look at some of them, when you look at some of the people within the caravan, yeah, I think it could be considered an invasion of our country. We can't have it.
These are some of the poorest people in the world coming up here.
There's some dangerous people. These are some rough people. I mean, you look at MS-13. They come from that area. This is a very rough group of people coming up. Not in all cases, but this is a very rough group of people. Look what they did to the Mexican army at the border. Look at the skirmish they just had. That was a very bad thing for the Mexican army. That was not easy.
And finally, you remember well in the campaign, you made a promise. You said, I will never lie to you. So can you tell me now, honestly, have you kept to that promise at all times? Have you always been truthful?
Well, I try. I mean, I do try. I think you try, too. You say things about me that are not necessarily correct. I do try, and I always want to tell the truth. When I can, I tell the truth. I mean, sometimes it turns out to be where something happens that's different or there's a change, but I always like to be truthful.
And I want to bring in Karen Travers now, who's at the White House. Karen, they delved into a lot of different topics during this interview. What were some of the big takeaways?
I think just again how the president, Diane, continues to make immigration the critical focus of his final push to the midterm elections. This is his rally cry right now for Republican voters, and he's talking about that caravan of migrants as an invasion of the United States. He's using language like that to justify why he is sending the U.S. service members down to the border. John Karl pushing him on that, about why that is necessary. And the president says it's because this is a rough group of people. He says they're criminals, but he's not providing showing evidence of that. And certainly, by all accounts from the reporting down there, this is made up a lot of families, too. There have been some skirmishes, but for the most part, this is several hundred people now, maybe a couple thousand, who have been walking miles and miles. They're 900 miles away from the U.S. border. But Diane, the president, calling it a national emergency, one that requires the military. Certainly a lot of criticism that this is just scare tactics to drive up support next week and get Republicans out to the polls.
Well, and it is a big campaign issue for the president, for the Republicans in general. I know the president was saying all this at a Florida rally last night, or while he was doing a Florida rally last night. Where is he headed today, and what other points are they expected to focus on?
Look for immigration to again be a central part of the president's message. Tonight he's heading to Missouri, though. This is day 2 of what will be a 6-day, 8-state, 11-rally campaign blitz that takes the president right up to Tuesday's midterm elections. Yesterday there was a moment, Diane, at that rally where he was asking the really fired up, raucous crowd, how many of you here in Florida have already voted? Early voting is very critical in Florida, and when all of the people in the crowd started cheering, he said, well, what am I doing here if it sounds like you've all already gotten to the polls? Because that's what he's trying to do out on the trail, is to get people out, to get them to vote, lock them in. I think it's also notable, in that interview with John Carl, the president sounded very bullish about the Republicans' chances of holding control of the Senate after next Tuesday, less so about the House. Diane, the president is going to states that have very critical Senate races: Missouri, West Virginia, Tennessee, Indiana, Montana. Not focusing as much on those critical congressional districts where the control of the House will be won or lost next week.
All right, Karen Travers from the White House. We appreciate it, Karen. Thanks. And now over to the University of Maryland, where the football coach has been fired just a day after being reinstated. This all comes after a player died of heat stroke in June, and Paula Ferris is here with the details on this whole back and forth. Paul, I know there's a lot to unpack here, because not only did a player die during practice, but there were also apparently some problems found within the football program itself.
Right, so this is a stunning turn of events, and DJ Durkin, who is the head coach that we're talking about, was shocked that this all happened, and a lot of people are angry to begin with that the University of Maryland didn't do the right thing right away. They kind of had to be forced to, but just to unpack what happened, Jordan McNair was a freshman football player, and he suffered a heat stroke in a spring practice. So there were allegations after his death. He died a couple of weeks after he passed out in practice. There were allegations of a toxic culture within the program. So what happened is in August, so several months ago, Coach Durkin was placed on paid administrative leave. They conducted 2 separate investigations. One of those investigations was conducted by the Maryland Board of Regents, which oversees the state's universities, okay? They found, after their investigation concluded, that there was not a toxic culture, but, quote, the athletic department lacked a culture of accountability. They reinstate him on Tuesday, all right? And then after a backlash, and I'm talking just a firestorm of backlash from alum, even the governor called on the University of Maryland to consider reinstating DJ Durkin. And listen to this scathing op-ed in the Washington Post from Sally Jenkins. She writes, parents, don't send your kids to Maryland to play football. Don't, because no one in the administration of that reeking junk heap knows what class or excellence or winning or big time really is. They don't know jack all about real success, and they certainly don't know how to put your son's health ahead of their own oily self-interest.
Wow.
I'm talking criticism from everywhere. The student government was arranging protests, so the university, this was the president, this wasn't the Board of Regents, the university president decided to usurp the Board of Regents. He terminated DJ Durkin less than 24 hours after the board had reinstated him. So that's kind of where we are right now. But DJ Durkin, you know, this opened the university up to possible legal claims. He can sue them for wrongful termination. So this is going to be anything but a clean separation and a clean break.
Yeah, and it's tough because it's sort of this gray area. It sounds like what they found was they felt there wasn't a culture where players felt they could speak up.
Right.
And so they felt in this case it created obviously a danger, or in this case, it ended up being deadly. But I know Jordan McNair's father spoke to ABC News this morning. What's his take on all of this?
Yeah, I mean, his take, obviously, you know, this is a family that's just looking for closure, but he told Cecilia Vega this morning on GMA that the family is kind of surprised, but they're just relieved.
All right, well, we wish them the best. I'm sure they're still struggling, dealing with the loss of their son, and Who knows what the university is going to do from here? As you said, they've got probably a complicated legal battle on their hands, one way or the other.
Yes, it's going to be an interesting battle from here on out. Definitely not a clean separation.
All right, Paula Ferris, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Diane.
And now we want to head over to Indonesia and the latest in that plane crash mystery. Divers have found one of the black boxes, and David Curley is monitoring all of this for us. David, what can this tell us?
So this is the data recorder. It's the flight data recorder. They didn't recover the entire what we would call the black box, but they found the most important part, which is where the data is stored inside that recorder. And it was actually brought up and put into a tank or a tub, looked like kind of a cooler, filled with water, which is standard operating procedure. The Indonesians say it's going to take them a week to read out that data recorder. Seems a little long compared to what would happen in the West, either in the United States, France, or Britain, or someplace else. But at least they have that part of the black box. Now, the other black box is still missing. That is the cockpit voice recorder. Here's the difference. The flight data recorder is going to tell you what the engines were doing, where the aircraft was, what were the inputs from the pilots. So you get all that data of what the plane was doing. The voice recorder, which they don't have yet, is inside the cockpit. You hear what the pilots were saying to each other. You can actually hear the noises of the engines if there's anything, an explosion or anything else. You can hear warning bells going off, and there are different warning chimes within the cockpit that would tell you what's going on. So it will be important to find that, but at least they have one of them now. And Diane, I would add that there is some question, because this was a really new 737, the latest version. It's called the MAX 8. It had the capability to send data to the ground. So even in flight, there's a chance that Boeing and GE, which is a partner in making the engines, and the airline actually have had data since the flight on Monday and haven't shared it. We asked Boeing and GE, do they have data already about this flight, and they declined to comment to us. Yep. So a major break. This is really good news. There still is more to come. They need to find that voice recorder as well.
Yeah, and it sounds unusual, that question about if they have data and why they wouldn't share it. But David, do they have any theories, any closer idea to what actually happened here?
Well, we have heard from sources that terrorism has basically now been ruled out. They don't think that it was anything to do with terrorism. Now, we do know that this aircraft, the same aircraft, on the flight before this, which was on Sunday, had an issue. The airline has not told us what that issue was. They've not been specific about, was it an engine issue? Was it an instrumentation issue? All they will say is that they fixed it. It was resolved, this technical issue, before the flight on Monday, but they've given us no information. What we are hearing from the Indonesians is that they're spending a lot of time behind closed doors with Boeing. That to me suggests that there has maybe possibly been some data that Boeing knows. They're sharing with the Indonesian authorities. The airline, I'm sure, is in there as well. The NTSB has been invited to take part in this investigation, which is a big deal too, because there have been issues between the Indonesians and the Americans in the past when it comes to aviation safety. So NTSB is there, Boeing is there, GE is there as well, all parties to this investigation. So I would think in the coming days, depending on how long it takes them to read out this flight data recorder, we'll have some sense on a theory. Question is, was it a technical problem that took the plane down on its own, a technical problem that the pilots did not deal with correctly that contributed to it and took the plane down, or just pure pilot error? If you rule out terrorism, those are kind of the three areas that you'd look at this point.
All right, David Curley for us. We appreciate the analysis, David. Thanks. We'll stay on top of this. And we also have some new details now in the death of Boston mob boss WHITEY Bulger. Police are now revealing a suspect and a theory on how Bulger was killed. Gio Benitez is in Boston with the latest on that. Gio?
Hey there, Diane. Yeah, we're here in South Boston, or Southie, and this is where really WHITEY Bulger grew up. This is where his life of crime started. And take a look. You see that building right there? That building was actually Triple O's Lounge. It's where so many of his shakedowns seem to happen. But as you said, we are now getting some new reports about what happened inside that prison. That notorious gangster WHITEY Bulger may actually have been killed in a mob hit. Now, we're learning that one of the alleged attackers, thought by many to be 51-year-old mob hitman Freddie Gias, he is serving a life sentence for violent crimes, including the murder of another mob boss, Big Al Bruno. Now, a private investigator says Freddie hated rats, and that since Bulger was an FBI informant, his murder was really not a surprise. Now, according to the New York Times, Bulger was found severely beaten. Officials telling the paper he was attacked with a padlock stuffed inside a sock. Bulger's violent past included at least 11 murders. He spent 16 years on the run until his capture in 2011. But that's really cold comfort for the families left behind, and we spoke to some of them. Listen in.
Hear the name Whitey Bulger. What do you think?
I used to get real angry, you know, and my thoughts were evil. I feel grateful that he died brutally and not from a natural cause.
And that right there was Stephen Davis. He lost his sister to Bulger's gang. She was just 26 years old. Bulger's partner pleaded guilty to her murder, but says it was actually Bulger who strangled her. Now, some are raising questions right now about why Bulger was moved to that prison and why he was put into the general population. But as you just heard, Diane, these victims, they are not complaining.
All right, Gio, interesting to hear that kind of perspective on someone's death. It's not a usual one, that's for sure, Gio. Thanks. And here in New York, we have a mystery surrounding the death of two sisters found bound together, washed up on the shore of the Hudson River. Lindsay Davis has the latest on that case. Lindsay?
Hey there, Diane. Police are still trying to piece together exactly what happened here. This is the area right here in the Hudson River where the sisters' bodies were discovered. Initially, police thought perhaps this was a pact that two sisters made to die together, but now they're beginning to think that there is much more to this story. Police initially put out sketches, and then on Wednesday, police identified the sisters as 22-year-old Ratana Ferreira and 16-year-old Tala Ferreira. Police say that their deaths were initially thought to be a possible suicide pact after potentially jumping off of a bridge like the George Washington Bridge, but police then ruled that possibility out, citing no trauma on either body. The women were found submerged in the water but fully dressed in yoga pants and fur-lined coats. Authorities are now asking the public for help. Police say that the sisters are from Saudi Arabia and had moved to Fairfax, Virginia in 2015 with their family. Now, Ratana then moved to New York after attending George Mason University. Both were last seen in August. Now, police interviewed the women's family in the D.C. area, trying to figure out a timeline of just what could have happened. According to the New York Times, police said that the sisters had a history of going missing and had recently requested asylum in the United States. Saudi embassy officials tell ABC News they're unable to confirm the asylum request. Police are treating this as suspicious deaths. Autopsies will now be conducted to try to determine the cause of death. Diane?
Bizarre case. Lindsay Davis from New York City. We appreciate it, Lindsay. And now let's get to those new concerns about bus safety. Those are on the rise after two deadly incidents in just the last week. A driver ran into a child in Mississippi yesterday, just after another incident in Indiana where a 24-year-old killed 3 children and seriously injured another. This morning, we're learning what she told police about that crash, and ABC's Alex Perez is in Rochester, Indiana with that. Alex?
Hey, Diane, we are learning new details about that driver that police say crashed into those 3 siblings, killing them. She's 24-year-old Alyssa Shepard, and she's due back in court here at the Fulton County Courthouse on November 13th. Now, authorities say she told investigators that she saw flashing lights that morning, but did not realize it was a school bus until those kids were right in front of her. Now, killed in that crash were 3 siblings, twin brothers, 6 years old, Mason and Xavier Engel, also their 9-year-old sister Olivia. Another child, an 11-year-old boy who was walking with them, was airlifted to a local hospital where he's recovering from a number of surgeries. Now, authorities say that driver, Alyssa Shepard, has been charged with 3 counts of reckless homicide. Now, in the wake of all this, officials have announced some changes in that area, something that family members and residents there say they've been asking for a long time. The school bus will no longer stop on that busy road. Instead, it will wind its way through the side streets of that neighborhood and pick up the kids there in that area. Now, school bus safety is an issue across the country. We have one stat that we want to share with you here that is alarming. A 2018 national survey of school bus drivers found that on a single day, nearly 84,000 vehicles passed their buses illegally. 3,000 here in Indiana alone. Again, on Wednesday now in Lee County, Mississippi, another child struck and killed while getting on the bus. The driver there cooperated with police and has been charged with aggravated assault. Now, the NTSB will send a team of investigators here to the crash here to analyze the scene and determine if there are any precautions that could be taken here or elsewhere to prevent a tragedy like this from happening again. Diane?
All right, Alex Perez from Rochester, Indiana. Thanks, Alex. And finally, let's check in with Ginger Z to see what the weather has in store for us. Ginger?
Diane, thank you. You know, we talked about it being a scary forecast for Texas as of Halloween. Well, it was. And this is the image coming from Katy, Texas. There were 4 reported tornadoes. That was probably one of them in that region. They reported one, and also came along with a lot of rain. Flash flooding in Houston, 2 to 6 inches of rain from there through Louisiana. Those images, just the sheets of rain covering the roads, making it very difficult to drive in Iowa, Louisiana. The cold front slides east, and it's a tornado watch that brings us Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, Mobile, Destin, Florida, all through 1 p.m. today. That's what's different about this. A lot of times we'll talk, and you hear me say afternoon or evening thunderstorms that are severe. This line is through the morning hours and even early afternoon. So something to watch as far east as southwestern Georgia. Now the low starts to move north and east, and along that cold front, it's going to become less of a severe weather threat, more of a flash flooding. You could still see some severe storms on the southern end of it, but it's going to be really the the urban areas that do flood often. Could get 2 to 4 inches by the time Friday night into early Saturday morning is through. So a very wet start to the weekend here along the East Coast, Diane.
All right, we'll get our raincoats out. Ginger Z from the Weather Center. Thanks, Ginger. And that does it for us here at the Debrief. Remember, you can catch your headlines all day long at abcnews.com or at your ABC News app. For ABC News Live, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great day.